Let's talk about anxiety. Imagine you're carrying a heavy backpack, and in it are all the things you worry about. Your job, your future, your relationships, your health. The weight is unbearable. But you keep walking, trying to manage it all on your own, and then someone comes along and says, just give it to God. It sounds simple, right? But how do you actually do that? How do you give anxiety to God when it feels like it's stitched into your very being at times? Picture this. You're sitting in your room and the thoughts start flooding your minds. What if this happens? What if I fail? What if things never change? Now imagine that as those thoughts come, Jesus is sitting right there next to you. You can feel his presence. You can hear his voice saying, I'm here, I've got you. Suddenly, the thoughts don't seem as loud and the weight feels a little lighter. But now imagine Jesus is no longer sitting next to you. He's down the street. You know he's there, but not as close. Those thoughts start creeping back in louder this time. And what if Jesus wasn't on the street at all? What if he was miles away? Suddenly, those worries feel insurmountable. Why? Because the awareness of God's presence diminishes. God knows how anxiety works. That's why he doesn't leave us to handle it alone. He didn't place Jesus down the street or in another city. He placed his spirit inside of us. Philippians 4:6-7 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Notice something important in this verse. The peace of God doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from the presence of God. When people say just give it to God, they're not asking you to suppress your worries or pretend they don't exist. They're asking you to invite God into them. It's saying, God, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do, but I'm giving this to you. Be with me in this. When you do that, you're not just handing over your problems. You're inviting the presence of the one who can handle them. Let's look at Matthew chapter 6:25-34. When Jesus addresses anxiety directly, he says, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. He goes on to point to the birds of the air and the flowers of the field, reminding us that if God cares for them, how much more will he care for us? But here's the key. Jesus isn't telling us not to worry, inviting us to shift our focus. In verse 33, he says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. When we focus on God, when we become aware of his presence, worry loses its power. God's presence is always in that storm. Remember the story of Jesus calming the storm in Mark chapter 4, verse 35-41? The disciples are panicking because the boat is being swamped by waves. Meanwhile, Jesus is asleep. And the disciples wake him up shouting, teacher, don't you care if we drown? What does Jesus do? He gets up, rebukes the wind, and says to the winds, quiet, be still. And the storm obeys, and the disciples are left in shock. But here's the lesson. The storm didn't disturb Jesus because he was fully aware of God's power. When we're aware of God's presence, even the fiercest storms can't shake us. They're going to scare us because we're human, but they can't shake our faith in the Lord. So how do you invite God into your anxiety? Here are a couple steps. Number one, when worry starts to rise, stop and say, God, I feel anxious about this, but I'm inviting you into it. I trust you to guide me. And then take a moment to remind yourself of his presence. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Psalm 23:1. Cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. The peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds. Philippians 4:7. The awareness of God's presence isn't about ignoring your problems. It's about letting him carry them with you. Let's go back to Genesis. After Adam and Eve sinned, they hid from God. But God's first question to them wasn't, what have you done? It was, where are you? God didn't ask because he didn't know. He asked because he wanted them to step out of hiding and into his presence. Today, God is asking you the same question. Where are you? Are you hiding behind your anxiety, trying to carry it all alone? Or are you stepping out into his presence, trusting him to bring peace to your chaos? Here's the truth. Anxiety can't thrive in the presence of God. When you become aware of his nearness, worry begins to fade. Today, if anxiety is weighing you down, take a moment, invite him in, say, God, I need you in this. I can't do it alone. Because when you do, you'll find the promise of Isaiah 26:3. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Let his presence remind you that you're never alone, and let his peace guard your heart and mind forever.